So let's think a little bit about Moses here. Moses, out of 2,390 people mentioned in the Bible, he's one of them. At least 100 prominent leaders mentioned in the Bible. He's one of them. Only 1/3 of them finish well. He's one of them as well. Now that should be a sobering thought. I mean, Moses is one of the most magnificent leaders ever. And yet there was a problem at the end. Now, when you do a character study, there is a 4-step process that you ought to follow. First is you want to relate to the scriptures involved. Now with Moses, think about scriptures involved with him, he's mentioned in 22 books of the Bible. You looked at all 22 of them, right?
Including 3 Corinthians.
The Lord spoke to Moses is said 93 times from Exodus to Joshua. You want to first look at the historical situation. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Okay, all of those Moses is mentioned, obviously. Really from Exodus through Deuteronomy, he's the main leader. But even when we get to Joshua, Moses is mentioned 58 times. So if you're doing a study of a character, one of the things that you want to do is you look at all the historical references to that person. So you found out all kinds of things. It's not just in those scriptures. There is some commentary on Moses. For example, Hebrews 11. Because there Moses is a hero of the faith. By faith, Moses. Acts chapter 7. Stephen, when he's giving his speech before those who are accusing him, he mentions Moses, and he gives a really beautiful historical perspective on Moses. And there are others. In the Psalms, Psalm 90 is a prayer of Moses. And so really, with Moses, you've got a lot of scriptures to look at. And so you have to choose where you're going to focus. You need to see all of them to give you the perspective, particularly if you're teaching on Moses. But for doing an assignment like this, then you've got to choose one area to really focus on. Okay, so you want to isolate the scriptures involved. Then secondly, you want to get the big picture. This was a TV show when I was a kid. The Big Picture came on, a historical show. And so what you want to do is you want to look at how did this person fit into the larger situation of what was going on? What was God doing? That kind of thing. So you want to look at the historical situation here. And in the case of Moses, at this point, Egypt is dominated by the Hyksos rulers. The Egyptians were not as effective as this time, so they were taken over by the Hyksos. Jacob and his entire family come down to Egypt because of the famine. And Joseph became one of the prominent leaders of Egypt and in Egypt, and he saved his whole family, really. And years later, Jacob's descendants are persecuted terribly by the Egyptians. So you get the whole larger picture of this. And then you want to form charts, make charts of this character, create a life story, for example. Here's one I did on the life of David. And really centered around the lessons that he learned in each part of his life. And so you would take Moses or whoever you're doing and make a life story chart of them. So you can see the whole perspective, depending on how much information that you have. So you get the big picture. Then what you do is you focus on the details. Now, for example, what do you know of Moses' background?
Levi, son of Levi.
Okay.
He was found in a basket. Because his
Okay.
father had to give him away to protect him.
Okay.
He was brought up by his mom for the first few years, so he was
Okay.
third culture.
And then?
Raised in
Third-
Pharaoh's palace.
He's raised in the palace. Okay. So, all kinds of things. But look at this. Jacob and Leah, remember she was the wife that was supposedly unloved. And they had 2 children together, or 3 children. Oh, maybe 4 children. And where did Moses come from this group? Levi. And so what happens is you have Jacob's prophecy about his son Levi, and look at the prophecy. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let my glory be united. Let not my glory be united with their assembly. Because in their anger they slew men. In their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it's fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. Well, if you look at this, you have the mother and father of Moses, descendants of Levi. Father comes from Levi. What might that suggest to you?
He's going to get mad and kill an Egyptian.
Yeah. And maybe there's some family traits that are passed down. You start looking at background and things like that. There are all kinds of things that you can trace. So you focus on the details, then you draw out the lessons and principles. So very quickly, let's think about Moses. And obviously, the life of Moses falls into these 3 40-year segments. And so what's true about the first 40 years? Where was it?
Egypt.
Okay, it was in Egypt. What else is true about it? The critical thing.
Was raised in the palace during his life.
Okay,
Oh,
all right. What was his birth?
he's what?
Jewish, Israelite.
He's Israelite, and they are being persecuted. And so that's why, who mentioned the basket? Katie, that was you, okay? The sons were supposed to be killed, and the mother and father didn't want to do this. So the mother made this floating basket, put it in the Nile, kind of in the bulrushes or something, and the other daughter was there watching it. Nile isn't that fast flowing of a river, and so no big deal, right? What do they have in the Nile? Crocodiles, yeah. Okay. So this is part of his private life, but then it becomes public toward the end, doesn't it? All right, what's true about his private life? What goes on then?
Well educated.
He's well educated. He's taken into the Pharaoh's family, and so he has the best education that Egypt has to offer. So, he goes through the school for the young children of the Pharaoh, and he probably has, basic education. He probably has military education. He probably has economic education. I mean, he really has tremendous. How do you know that?
He wrote 5 books of the Bible.
Yeah, okay. No, it says that he was educated, the best education Egypt has to offer. So there is an involvement. He is learning leadership here, and he's learning leadership skills. So those 40 years, he's learning leadership skills. Then what happens?
Aaron Jacob.
Okay. There is an error in judgment here. He murders an Egyptian. There's failure and frustration at that point. Now, why did he do that?
Because he had a passion for his people's freedom.
He had a passion for his people, and they were being mistreated. And the New Testament says that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So he made a choice. He made a personal choice. He identified with his family background, his people, not with the Egyptians. And so he saw a Hebrew being mistreated, and so he killed the Egyptian. Then what happened?
Ran away.
Yeah. The next day or so, he sees two,
Oh, right, yeah.
Hebrews that are having a fight, and so he tries to moderate that and say, "You're going to kill us too? What's the deal?" And so then he realizes that he's in trouble, and Pharaoh really comes after him. And so what he does is he flees to the desert. And so what's significant about these 40 years?
He learned how to take care of the sheep, which take care
Okay.
of people.
Okay. Yeah, that was really different, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Because see, here it's private. He's all kind of in isolation. He's not involved. He's no longer part of the leaders of Egypt and all that. But he's really in isolation. And so what he does, in one sense, he unlearns leadership. He unlearns some of the stuff he does, and he leads sheep. Now, why is that significant?
Learned how to wander in the desert really well.
Oh. Okay.
Good resume booster.
Yeah. But take that a little further. And what does that mean?
That's gonna humble you quite a bit.
Oh, it's going to humble you an amazing amount. Yes.
He learned how to survive.
He what?
He learned how to survive.
He learned how to survive.
Right, depend. He learned how to depend.
He learned how to depend on the Lord.
There's a saying I heard when we visited Israel that, what was it? It took 40 years to take Egypt get the Israelites out of Egypt, but it really was to get
Egypt out of
Israelites.
Israelites, okay. So how does this end? I mean, he's learning things about himself here. How does it end?
Burning bush.
The burning bush. And so at this point you have the burning bush and you have the calling of Moses there. Now the thing that strikes me in this is he's 40 years. I mean, he's married now. He has family. He's been with sheep in the desert. I mean, that must be really, I don't know. And just think about that.
Long time.
Long time. A long time, God is silent. But then he sees this bush that is burning, which should have been consumed, but it's not consumed. And he thinks, I need to stop and look at this. And maybe God's saying something to me. I don't know about you, but I think about that, and I don't know whether I would have done that. After 40 years of silence, I don't know if that would have been open to the fact, well, maybe God wants to say something to me. I mean, granted, in one sense, God appeared to him. One sense, it's described as an angel appears to him. New Testament says angel. Must have been a pretty striking thing. Started out just a little bit strange and unusual, but it turned into kind of an amazing thing. And then you get to the point where he's going to argue with God for a lot of different reasons. I mean, I'm not an eloquent man. I'm not, et cetera, et cetera. Even though he had the best training and all of that back here. Okay, so the next 40 years starts out with them leaving Egypt and all of the conflict he has to have with Pharaoh and standing up to Pharaoh. And what you have now is public and then private, and you have the implementation of his leadership. And he relearns leadership in this sense through those experiences leading the Israelites for those 40 years. And you have a couple of very significant things that happen. Moses has to exercise a number of different leadership styles here, very interestingly. But then there's some significant personal things that happen. And of course, one of them is he breaks the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Are you seeing a pattern here? Anger. I mean, you can understand that. I mean, he came down and they'd already started worshiping some other god just while he was up there on the mountain. And he gets angry and he breaks the tablets. And then a little bit later, what's the other one?
Strikes the rock.
Strike the rock.
Struck the rock twice. In Numbers chapter 20. What was significant about that?
Acted in unbelief, I think.
Yeah. It wasn't just anger at this point. It's unbelief and something else. I have a friend in Hungary. When we were studying this, he said the first 40 years he's learning that he's something. The second 40 years he's learning that he's nothing. In the third 40 years he's learning that God can make something out of nothing.
Very good.
Now, there are some principles in this wilderness experience we'll do real fast. One was adaptation. You know, he took a whole group of people who had been slaves, and during those years he had to transform them into a people. Now, what does it take to have a nation, by the way? To be a nation, what does it require?
People,
Okay, it takes people.
boundaries.
Okay, God took a few people into Egypt for 400 years and built them into a large people. There were how many? There was 1 million at least, and we don't know how many, total. Just blows your mind when you think of how many people wandering through the desert. Okay, so you need people. What else do you need? You need a land. They don't have that yet, but they get it at the end, don't they? What else do you need?
Leader.
Be laws.
You need a constitution or laws, some governing principle. And so, God developed the people through Moses. He gave the laws, and then through Joshua, he took them and gave them the land, and they became a nation. All right. So, large adaptation that Moses had to do. People who had been slaves, and now they're free. Now they have to really become. They have to have their own military, and they have to be willing and able to go and conquer the land. Delegation he had to learn. Where was that?
Jethro.
Okay.
Exodus 18.
Exodus 18, yeah. Okay. Humility, he had to learn that significantly. And mentoring. He had to develop leaders that would follow him. Come after him. Exodus 18, management model. Jethro counsels Moses first to be a mediator between them and God, to be a communicator, be a mediator between them and God and them and each other, a communicator, same, and a delegator. Those are things that he had to learn. So there are all kinds of leadership principles that you can take from the life of Moses. And you can see, a leadership principle is not he was born to, he was in a basket when he was little. The leadership principle has to do with all of these kind of things that he learned in the process of actually leading people through the desert.